Well, hello, children. It's really great to be able to talk with you today. We're moving through Lent, this time of getting ready for Easter, and the story which we're going to tell today points towards the death and the resurrection of Jesus, Jesus dying on the cross and rising again. Jesus went to the temple. Now, the temple wasn't just like a church. There are many churches, aren't there? Every community's got a church. But in the whole world, there was only one, a temple in Jerusalem. And the Jews believed that the temple was the place where God dwelt, where God lived with his people. And that was the place that they were to worship. And in particular, that was the place where they were to offer sacrifice to God. And so Jews tried, when they could, to go to the temple, this wonderful building in Jerusalem. And Jesus, like lots of his contemporaries, went up to the temple. But when he got there, Jesus found that the outer part of the temple, this huge, vast space, was full of people holding a market. They were selling doves and sheep and cattle. These were the kind of things that were needed for the temple sacrifices. People sacrificed the doves. They often bought the doves and they offered them to the priests who would sacrifice them. But Jesus recognized that actually this was a huge, huge racket. They were selling the doves for much more than you'd sell the doves outside the temple, and impoverishing people who had no other choice but to buy these things in these locations. And so Jesus decided to take a whip of cords. Now just imagine a large kind of whip, which you might clear things with. And he swished it around and he got angry and shouted and cross, and he drove the sheep and the cattle out of the temple, and he said to the people who were selling the doves, "Stop making my father's house a marketplace." You can imagine that there was chaos everywhere. People were angry with him, and the whole thing was hugely disruptive. And they came to him and they wanted to know why he had the right to do this. What's the sign? What gives you the right? And how can you prove to us that you have this right? And Jesus gave them a really strange answer. He said, "Destroy the temple, and in 3 days I will raise it again." And they were completely mystified. They said, "This temple's been it's been being built for 46 years. It wasn't the first temple on that side. There'd been several, but this particular temple, which King Herod had decided to build, it's been being built for 46 years, and it's still not finished. And you're going to build it again in 3 days if it gets torn down?" But actually, Jesus wasn't really talking about the temple, not the building. Jesus was talking instead, his own followers recognized, about his own body. Because that's the story which we're about to celebrate, isn't it? That Jesus' body was destroyed. He died on the cross, but that he raised it up after 3 days. And it's really important that Jesus kind of moves from the temple to his body, because what he's saying is, you believe that the temple is the place where God lives with his people, the place where God meets his people, the place where God is close to his people. But actually, I am the place where God lives with his people, where God meets his people, where God is close to his people. If you want to see God, don't come to the temple, come to me. I've got a few icons here, pictures, which tell something of the story which we've been talking about of Jesus' body being destroyed and raised up again. But I want to start with this one, because this icon, which is simply Jesus the light is shining on these icons in a really strange way. So they're not as vivid as they are in real life, but I hope you can see it. Jesus is holding a book and blessing his people. And this is a reminder that Jesus is the Word of God, speaking the words of God to us, but also God's speech, God's purpose, God's language, God's love for us. Just as the Jews loved to go to the temple, because in the temple they thought they were close to God, so we are called to come to Jesus. We love to come to Jesus because he is the place where we can find God. Perhaps because he cleansed the temple, because he made this huge demonstration and was so disruptive, they wanted to kill him. And so Jesus ended up on the cross. And here's my icon of Jesus on the cross. We're about to tell this story in just less than 4 weeks' time of Jesus dying on the cross. And the thing is that even though Jesus on the cross looks weak and helpless, was weak and helpless, it's at this moment that Jesus shows us God's love in the most dramatic, the most wonderful way. But the cross wasn't the end. I've got a tiny little icon here, I don't know if you can see it, of the resurrection. Jesus coming out of the tomb, and the cross now lying destroyed below his feet. In a sense, this icon is saying the one that when you thought you could squash Jesus and get rid of him because he was annoying to you, actually, God says, no, you can't do that. Jesus rises up. He triumphs over their destructiveness. He triumphs over their hatred. And he triumphs over all of their attempts to get rid of him. Jesus really did raise the temple of his body, in 3 days. And so as we read the story of the cleansing of the temple, and as we come to this Easter in a few weeks' time, Jesus is asking us, will you come to me? Will you recognize in me, in Jesus, the one who reveals God, the one who shows us what God is like, the one who is filled with God's love, the one who invites us to see God as we see Jesus? Thank you for listening.